Andrea, welcome. Welcome to the KINEXON Xtra Edge podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Again, my name is Trey Cannon. I'm one of the customer success managers here at KINEXON. And Andrea is currently working for the Minnesota Lynx, a team in the WNBA. We've got her on here today to kind of go over her experience as a KINEXON user, her experience as a performance coach, and definitely we're going to talk about some topics that are at the top of her list of when it comes to, tracking some data for the upcoming season. So Andrea, first and foremost, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. Tell me a little bit about your background as a performance coach, some places you've been to, some stops you've made. Excited to learn a little bit more about your background as well.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So I've kind of been what I call like untraditional in my journey. It hasn't been necessarily what we have like mapped out as far as from your education to your GA to experience in that regard. So I kind of had a later start, which at times felt like was holding me back, but I realized now it was kind of the chip on my shoulder to keep me motivated. So I didn't start my undergrad till I was 24. So prior to that, I was just doing some personal training. But realized I really want to work with athletes. And so that kind of pushed me to go towards having obviously our bachelor's so we can get certified and move forward with that. So 24 and you're trying to relearn how to write like APA format pages and trying to relearn all the math and things. So that was challenging. But along the way, I really realized how much I appreciated education. And my professors became my network. And I started really understanding the value of networking. And that's a huge base of my career so far. So after I finished undergrad, I did the whole tour of the interns and all that stuff. So I ended up at EXOS at one point doing an internship out in San Diego, which I highly recommend. So that was a great time. And then I went back to St. Louis where I did my master's at Lindenwood University. And from there I did an internship at Louisville. And I just got exposed to so many different sports. And so being like at a small Division I, you were just in charge of probably like 4 or 5 sports that you got to program for or assist with. So that was really helpful in the early stages of my career. I went from working like synchronized swimming to obviously the volleyball, then golf and men's lacrosse, and really every sport that we could offer, we kind of got our hands in. So that was really helpful in my career. That opened up doors along the way to go to the Minnesota Twins. I was a fellow for them in 2019. Worked my way to a full-time position there, and then got a call from Stanford to jump over there to California. So I went there and worked for their women's basketball program for 3 years, which brought me back to Minnesota now. It's kind of my old stomping ground. So back here now with the Minnesota Lynx. So in the course of 15 years, it's kind of hard to pinpoint all of that. But like I said, untraditional, and just kind of taking opportunities where they would happen, and knowing that so many people put their name on me and gave me opportunities, which really I want to do the same for people now, but I got to places because of relationships and network, and that's just really the base of my career.
Yeah, that's awesome, Andrea. Appreciate you sharing that. And again, as someone who's kind of worked in this space from a more of a vendor perspective, I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, if I put 2 or 3 performance coaches in a room, it's 1 or 2 degrees of separation between the 3 of them. So it's very awesome to hear that your experience is similar to some of those that have gotten to the positions that you have. So that's awesome. For us here at KINEXON, our first introduction to you and getting to know you a little bit better as a performance coach was obviously at Stanford. So can you kind of, if we wanted to start there, tell me about your KINEXON experience at Stanford, and then obviously we'll transition into how things are going right now for you in Minnesota. So we'd love to hear more about, how things have gone with Tyler and kind of your first introduction to KINEXON.
Yeah, that's my guy. Tyler really was pivotal for my learning and my exposure to KINEXON. So jumping into basketball, obviously I came from baseball, so there's a good amount of technology that's kind of happening there. And so you kind of get well versed into the force plate side and some video tracking and some of those things. But now coming over to more GPS monitoring and looking at KINEXON as a whole was pretty brand new to me. And so he was so patient and kind, and obviously he knows it in and out. And so he was just really diligent to teach me really just like the hygiene of how we collect it and the importance of collecting it. And even though we don't know exactly what we're doing with it yet, making sure we're really diligent in how we label it and how we store it and look at it. That really was a big eye opener to me in that. And previously, the strength coach that was there prior to me was doing the same thing. So we had historical data, which was really helpful to look at and collect it. This is obviously like around the pandemic time too. So it really wasn't utilized great, in the sense of how we're managing that, because we're managing so many other things.
Sure.
So we just had so much historical data to look at. But I guess Tyler sharing an office with him for 3 years and just getting to pick his brain all the time. He's a wizard with it, but the volleyball side and just really understands it. So just being exposure to different metrics that we'd look at, how we would utilize them, looking at player performance, looking at return to play, practice planning, all the really nuances that come with it. I mean, you can really go down these rabbit holes, which is taking one metric, let's taking one metric and just really diving into that one. And then you can go even further, like player positions, looking at player movement profiles. And so it can get really, really like nitty gritty down to it. And so he was really good at times to pull me back out, just look at the big picture at times. But no, he was brilliant. And he's actually someone I talk to constantly still today about it. And I'll send him some data and ask him questions. And he's always been a resource in my career. But he really was the one that introduced me to this and being exposed to it.
Yeah. And the term that you mentioned was the term hygiene, data hygiene. That's something I love that term. I might steal it from you if you don't mind, because that's something, as you know, you talked about the rabbit hole of performance data, especially what, KINEXON can provide, especially from an LPS standpoint. And when I think of the term as hygiene is like when I'm looking at my data is the diligence of being, a coach in your shoes, being able to collect that data, being able to organize it, communicate it to constituents amongst the staff. And I think hygiene is kind of a great term because it's a very extensive process. And I think, from my end as working with, coaches in your position is I can only enhance what you guys are doing. And you and I have had those conversations about, hey, what are some things day to day, week to week that you could do to help with, with that data? And maybe if you don't mind, Andrea, dive a little bit deeper for me into what that hygiene is. Maybe talk about some examples of like you and I have talked about, hey, how to phase certain parts of the data or just categorize it by naming. Can you share a little bit about, what are some of those specific examples of hygiene that you've done with, or data hygiene that you've done with our KINEXON data specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing's ever new. It's always reused. I'm sure I've heard that term at some point, so I will not take credit for calling it the hygiene part of it, but it just makes sense in my mind. I think it really goes down to how you organize it is so important. And so it's the consistency of use. I think it looks different for every person, but what is also sustainable is really important. So what can you continuously do every single time? If one day you're able to grab the pre-practice work, but the next time you can't, you need to figure out what's sustainable because that really will skew things. So I think that's the first thing for me. Like, what can I do at the base layer that really will continue throughout the season, regardless of home or away, practice schedule changes, whatever changes, like how can I make sure there's consistency with how I collect it? And from there, I think it's also then how do you organize it, label it? And something that I dive into more and more is like, how do I do that work on the front end? And I think that's what you and I talk about all the time. It's like, how can I knowing the practice plan or knowing the drills that I know coach is going to really dive into today, pre-label that and how valuable that is because you don't know what's going to happen. All of a sudden you get in practice and now you got a player out and you're doing, workouts on the side and all these things start happening then preparing for the worst basically. And so I think just having the pre-work ahead of time has really been a game changer as far as the organization of it. For me. And I think it's also I'm kind of old school with pen and paper still too. So I had the practice plan and I'm writing timestamps as well. And so it's I kind of can cross check some of the things that happen as far as going back and labeling it. If I have to, instead of doing it live, obviously live is much better and easier, but if I can't, that's a big part of it. And I think it's also naming things the same. So whatever you name something, keep that name the same. Even from the stance of the capitalization of it and how once you export it, it really does matter and it kind of stays within that system. So not all of a sudden changing it from competitive shooting to shooting. What is the title that it's called and stick with that. It just kind of takes away some of the confusion and just the ups and downs that maybe you go through. So I think that's what's sustainable for you as a performance coach. What can you continually do day in and day out and how you organize it and analyze it and how much pre-work can you do ahead of time to prepare for those practices and games has really been helpful for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about it in that perspective because what I find a lot when I work with, coaches in your position, again, most of the time former athletes, competitive individuals where, there's certain approaches from an athletic mindset that you can still take to your data. Hey, these are the things I need to do, my pre-work, my practice per se of how I can organize that stuff. So when chaos does happen, as you know, in professional sports or, any elite sport level, minute by minute, things are changing. And that's exactly right. What I talk about with any of the coaches that use our data is, hey, develop some consistencies and some things that you're working on that you can rely on, you can always lean on, just like you are as an athlete. Hey, this is my pre-practice routine. This is my pre-free throw routine. Same kind of concepts apply from our data. And I've seen a lot of coaches, especially you, take advantage of that. because again, you just have to be able to be ready for whatever that chaos is for that day, which, as you know, could be, quite a number of different things. And I think that's the approach I take as well. Again, this is data that's extremely important, but again, it has to suit what you guys are doing day in and day out. And I think those hygienic approaches or certain things you guys lean on as coaches are going to be what makes or breaks your data and lets you guys really add that value to at least what I've seen so far. A question I had for you, Andrea, and leading up to this, what are some maybe misconceptions that some coaches have about maybe how to go about getting the data or just analyzing the data in general? Have you found yourself kind of get caught into some classic misconceptions or things like that?
Yeah, I think probably it's technology in general, where we think that it's like, maybe I view it from like a sport coach perspective, where it almost feels like it's withholding them from doing things, or it's like the full stop where you can't. It's like telling you what you can't do. And so I think sometimes you're breaking that mold of like, honestly, it's an overused term, but it really is to optimize. Like, how can we get the most out of them? And sometimes more is less, and sometimes more is more. And so how do you actually figure out what that looks like? And so I think there's a lot of misconceptions about, from like a coach's perspective, a sport coach perspective, about how they would implement it and utilize it. And so I think that's part of it, where you have to figure out the buy-in for it. And the tool, like, it really is that. And I think I came up into the field without having it. And so like I've never had to lean on it. And so now I wonder about the strength coaches now that they've only known this.
Sure. That's a great point.
And I think that I would guess, and the more and more I talk to them, it's like we always swing this pendulum so far. And so now it's like, because they've had so much exposure for so much technology, now they almost like don't want it. And so now they're just going back to like the old school, how we used to. And so they're just like, we're finding this balance. Now, people that didn't have, like, I just had a jump mat and a stopwatch. Like now, like, I crave the technology for more information and as a tool. And so I think that's what I want people to know too, is like, we can gather the information, but if a coach wants them to get on the line and run some more, like, they're going to do that. And I think that that's appropriate. And then you figure out down the line, how can I compensate for the things that we did? Or it's not meant to be like a paralyzing experience. It really is to optimize, and it's ranges, and it's fluid, and it flows, and it's not this black and white that we try to make it, and it's not this ideal number. It's really just this fluid movement, just as humans are. So those are some things I've been exposed to as far as like just the misconceptions of maybe more of the negative to it.
Do you think now, obviously, wherever that pendulum might be, whether it's transitioning more to the sports science, data analytics side, or it's swinging back to, hey, we're doing old school pen and paper stuff, is there metrics that you see from KINEXON or things that our data is giving you that kind of try and meet both sides of that? Because obviously I see it all the time where we've got an old school coach or a new school coach. That's a different conversation. Is there some metrics in your experience as using KINEXON that kind of help battle or get that message across, regardless of wherever that pendulum might be for that coach?
Yeah. And I wonder if it's first, the conversations have to happen in the front end with that coach. Like, what do they value and what do they want out of it? And I think we kind of leave them out of the equation. And in the same breath, I think like they don't know what they don't know. So you have to educate. But at the same time, like, I've been around some brilliant coaches in my career. And like sometimes like they don't even know that they're following a load management perspective, because they're just going off of body language or what their experience was. And they're really spot on. That has literally been my case for the majority of my career. Now, there are times where things get out of hand and maybe you have to put it back in, but majority, I think that's part of it. So I think it's figuring out, what is a sport coach looking for? And then you meet them there. And then from there, I think it is where you kind of educate them and find out what they would like. So like everyone knows distance covered. Like everyone can understand miles. And so like that's kind of where I start. Like how many miles we're covering, and like in a training camp versus the practice versus the shoot run. So start with like these metrics that make sense to what they already know. And then from there, now you get into like cumulative acceleration load. Now you start talking about physio load. And so I think it just starts that conversation. So I kind of find the base point. And coaches are brilliant. Like, we think for some reason as sports performance coaches or sports scientists, like we know more than they do, but we might know what it's called. We might know how to do certain things, but like, gosh, don't discredit their skill set and what you might learn from them. And so once I learned like how she wants to, like, especially coming into a new year with a new coach, like I just want to stand back and watch, and how does she operate and what is the culture she's pushing? And she's incredibly intelligent and analytical, and she wants to know this information. So I've been really fortunate to be on my game, because she wants to know, she wants to quantify what a shoot around looks like on the road versus at home. And she wants to find, is there a correlation between wins and losses and time spent? So long-winded answer to this, I just think you have to figure out, meet in the middle, and what does that look like? So it doesn't swing so far left and right. And you get to kind of control and dictate it and add more value, because you already got their buy-in, because they want to know more. But I think that same misconception, it's like, don't shove it down their throat type of approach. Like, almost make them want more of it. And so you kind of sprinkle in little here and there. And I mean, maybe you start talking about certain players and she's noticing, and now you're talking about fatigue, and you just kind of figure out where it has a place in. So you better know your stuff, because when there's an opportunity, you're walking down the hallway with her and there's a chance to kind of share something, like then it makes it more appealing. That way.
And that's a great point to talk about too, meeting coaches in the middle. And I think that's, again, it's easier said than done. It really takes a performance coach that knows how the KINEXON data works, and then it obviously takes a coach that is receptive. And trust me, I've worked with many coaches and trying to perfect that approach. And what I would say is no two approaches are the same. Certain parts of the message are going to resonate more with other coaches and less with others. So it sounds like obviously you've got a great thing going with your staff, within the Lynx right now and with your coaching staff. Tell me a little bit about how this data is communicated to some of the players. I know, like right now we're heading, preseason is starting to ramp up a little bit. What kind of conversations are you having day in and day out with some of your players? And how is this data being presented to them if it is?
Yeah, I think that's an underutilized tool as well. It's getting players involved in it. Like at the end of the day, this is their data and their numbers. And so the same thing where it's like, start with what they know. And so they know I picked distance or jumps or jump height, and now it gets competitive, or who had the biggest jump of the day, or who had run the most miles, or whatever it is. Like now they're involved and they're starting to understand these metrics and these titles and names. And so now if a coach sees that players care about it, and that also helps the coach want to care about it. And so it's just this kind of like fluid, cyclical feelings that are happening into it. So even after post-practice, I'll throw it up on the TV monitor and show like the loads of the day and let them see and compare and like get competitive. In a good way to let them kind of be bought into it as well. So I think that's like an approach that helps me with some of that buy-in for them. Yeah. But for me, like this is a brand new system for this team. And so to come in my first year and just collect and watch and observe. And I think we don't do enough of that. We want to have solutions right now, or we want to have opinions right now. And it's like, the W is new for me. So let me see it. Let me watch it. And so we're just collecting it. And then over time, like maybe we were about a few months into it and you start kind of seeing some trends and some different things that kind of happen. And now it's educating coaches and players and involved with it. So that was part of my approach. And now we have a year's worth. And so now we're looking at this next year and how will we approach training camp? What does that look like? That's a 2 weeks, and it's kind of an intense 2 weeks, but making sure we're ready for season. And I got a chance to, go to the finals, and we went the longest you can go. When you look at our season, we played every game possible but one. We were in the Commissioner Cup, so that's an extra added game. We took every series to 5, except for our first one was just to 2 because of best of 3. So there's one game we left on the table for the entire season. And so you're preparing for that. And so I think it's just like you're constantly preparing for the worst case scenario, double overtime games that we see often, or like a player playing 40 plus minutes. So I think that's how you have to approach the workload and looking at some of that. So that's my thought right now as preparing for the season. How can I prepare them for the worst case scenario? So that way, I hope we don't have it, but they're ready for that. So those are conversations. We're looking at practice planning. We're looking at individual players. We're looking at positions. Because I'm a big believer, and maybe we'll dive into it later, but you have to individualize this as much as possible. Not even just, even more individualized than your bigs and your guards. Like every big play is different, and there's a movement signature that happens between two of them. And so you cannot say all bigs need to work within this capacity and they need to have this type of movement. Like that's so individualized. And that's where you take really the subjective with the objective and look at it. So if I notice that a big the next day is just exhausted, look at historical data and like, okay, like her mechanical load was over 1,000 for that experience. Like for her, that is a load and that is a metric that really makes her feel a certain type of way for a couple of days after. Now I have actually a metric individualized for a person, whereas the other big hits, 1,200 and no issue. And obviously there's so many variances that happen with women and their body and what would happen for recovery. But how you start looking at metrics individual as a person, not even the position, not even the sport, but you kind of just keep going down this path. And so now you kind of have these load metrics that kind of indicate different things for different players.
Yeah, and that's, Andrea, it's a great point. You talk about the path for specific players, and those paths are going to be longer and shorter depending on, number one, what type of player they are in the league and how long have they been with you guys. And that's something you and I have talked about before, that, hey, this, last year was your first time using, in the W, and understanding, hey, we're in that collection phase. And that's a great mindset to have. And that's what I talk about with coaches that are, whether they're in the first year, the second year, or third year with KINEXON, there's different things that are associated with being successful in that. And that's okay. And you hit the nail exactly on the head. Hey, right when you got to the Lynx, hey, we're in collect mode. how can we work on being the best data collectors we can, because we don't have that data set to refer back to. Now, going into year 2, you'll have a whole different goal with the data. And that's something from a KINEXON standpoint, I'm constantly, reassuring and telling our teams, it's like, hey, there's going to be different mindset and different goals for however long the data you've had. And we can't work off of and, create an individualized path for 3 years of data when we've had KINEXON for 3 months. And that's sometimes expectation-wise a great piece of why KINEXON can help, because it can meet you wherever you're at. There's still value whether you've got 3 weeks worth of data, 3 months, or 3 years. And I think what you're going to be really excited about now this year is, hey, we've got a full season of data, and specifically for the Lynx, the longest possible data set that you could ever have in the W, which again, was a great run for you guys, but now it's like, hey, we can really look back and see what were some times that the players were fresh, where did we struggle a little bit. And again, I think that's those experience that you have not only as a coach, but then from a performance side that you guys can really pull from and pluck from. Hey, we want to recreate this type of practice atmosphere. Hey, we want this to be like game 5, or we want this to be like a preseason, practice from last year. Now you have those examples to pull from, but again, you don't get that unless you're collecting data in the format that we talked about, making sure that it's organized and accessible for you and whoever's looking at it. And again, it's kind of that full circle picture, like, oh, wow, now we can really start making changes, making enhancements to what we're doing specifically on individual player levels, which again, helps the whole group be successful.
100%. I think that's spot on. And even if you think about like it's even though you have a year's worth, like every team is not the same. Whereas in college, and obviously the landscape of college is changing, but you would typically have that athlete for 4 years. And so there is like, you can find the trends for individual players. Now at another level where it's like you really are reliant on diving into it every single day, because that team next year will not look the same, or your roster is changing so often. We're fortunate to have a lot of returners come back, but even that, like making sure it is like, and you look at how the coach coaches, she'll change and how she approaches things because the roster changes or the approach changes. You want to repeat the success of last year, but it can't be the same format because the team will be different. And so looking at this is an edge for us to look at previous data to have it. But like that's the patience to make sure like it is the collection phase. Sure. And I know we get excited. It's a financial investment, it's a time investment. And so you want to see the results right away, or you want to feel the impact right away. And if you do it quickly and accurately, you'll never play the long game, and it's literally used against you. And so I was very cautious of that, say like, I think it's this, I'm leaning towards this, or it seems to be trending. Like there's ways to vocalize this. Like, I don't know for sure yet, and I'm not going to stand on it completely, but it does look like this. When we do a shoot around, it looks like this, or what is our load per minute or intensity, or how we want to have a high volume and a low volume day and what that looks like. And so just like and it was almost like, because it was so new, it was just like, there wasn't like this pressure to come in and write everything right away. It's like, let's just learn it together. And so it was such a nice exposure to it, to be your first year to use it, and to kind of teach coaches how to use it. And it really is your competitive advantage in a sense.
Yeah. And from a new data perspective, like you're mentioning, hey, we're just collecting. I tell coaches all the time, there's ways that you can still gain that value very quickly. It's like, if I only have a month's worth of data, hey, what does the first week look like? Did we as a coaching staff think that, hey, players were fresh, we were happy with the tactical basketball play? We can check that box. How can we recreate that? That's the approach, the kind of stackable approach of, hey, how can we, get better from that week that we did? Did we like what we did? And then from a performance side, hey, what do the numbers look like? How can we repeat those numbers? But again, that's what I revert back to all the time is, if that data, those drills, those phases, those sessions aren't organized in a format in our system, like you've done such a great job with, that value can't come full circle again, which, as you know, is what we've kind of been the initiative we've talked about is, hey, understanding how to collect that data from its base simple form and being able to use it for years to come.
Love it.
A question I had, maybe, thinking from more of a league perspective, KINEXON, obviously we've got, a fair amount of teams in the WNBA. You're still very new to the WNBA. What are some things that you've seen maybe in your first year from a data perspective that you want to see the W get to and kind of grow off of to help help advance the players, advance the league, and again, just kind of bringing more of that performance data into the WNBA?
Yeah, if you have control of this, I don't know, but I'd love to be able to wear wearables in games. That really has been a challenge. I hope we get there. I understand the reasons why we aren't there yet. But obviously you guys are great to convert from Second Spectrum over. So we get game day data, but we're just not wearing it, which has been a huge plus for us to see what games feel like and look like without obviously breaking the rules and wearing them. So I'd love to see the league grow into that, because I think when we can approach it that it literally is a tool to help enhance and optimize player performance and player care and health, and not in a way that is going to affect the dollars that they get in their pocket and their contract, and to show what they are not working hard or working hard, and to quantify these things that we have no reason to. But really, it comes from a perspective of health. And so that's where I think things get really skewed, is when you looked at how many times in the headlines that we see Steph Curry's out because of load management, how now people feel a certain type of way about that. And I think there's just such an approach to make sure that the league understands that this is really to help the long game of our players and player care and how we can do it. So I'd love to see it grow in that. I think that the more WNBA coaches start diving into this and we start looking at it, I think research is down the pipeline to start looking at not only research for women's basketball, but at this level too. Like it's still so new, and it's growing and it's rapidly growing. So how can we actually look at some research when it comes to load management, and looking at player performance at this level? So I think KINEXON is going to have a huge say and role in doing those things. I look forward to it.
We hope. And you talked about the, more or less the negative connotation with the term load management. And I agree with you. Like sometimes that word, whether you're seeing it on, in sports media, you're seeing, again, players sitting out, that has that negative connotation. I've challenged a lot of our coaches and users to, hey, let's make, and not necessarily be the coach with the data, as more or less the Grim Reaper telling coach or players what they can and can't do. I challenge them to give as many examples of when you can't do things as when you can do things. And I've found it, not many coaches, if you say, hey, I'm sure you would agree with me, Andrea, when you say, hey, coach, we can go another 15 minutes. I've yet to see coaches that are be like, hey, we're not going to take advantage of that. So again, it's that mindset. It's how this data is shaped to help both, organizations, athletes, players, et cetera. That's how it's going to have to be to move forward and be more successful, is finding those examples of, hey, this is when you can do more. And we know you can do more based on that historical data we've collected. And that sometimes I've kind of reset that mindset sometimes with certain teams and organizations to be like, hey, let's find just as many examples of when we may need to shut it down a little bit, or on the flip side, do more work, find more ways to get players more work effectively. And that's something I've tried to do as someone that's been in the space for a bit, trying to reshape that term around load management, not always having to be negative.
Right. No, 100%. I think that's kind of your entrance into the door too. They love hearing that. It's a green day go. I think every day is a green day with a certain type of approach. It's like, hey, we're going to go hard as you can, but it's got to be 45 minutes. And so the stop is 45. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about as hard as you can go for 45 minutes. And so I think if you figure out every day is a green day for a coach, but you have to figure out the strategy of it. Or it's like, let's make today a big teaching day. So then that it's going to be a lot of stop and start, or it's going to be a lot of downtime. But okay, great. They were going to do more education, or more teaching, or more schemes. And we're going to talk about different things. Like that's a green day for them. So it's figuring out like exactly what you're saying. How do you kind of find those how do you sell it in a way that makes them see that every day, is that green day? And I even think when you're talking about like the load management and the negativity of it, and I would just strongly say, like, if it gets to a point where a player has to be completely shut down for a game and it's not an injury reason, I would wonder then how is the load managed prior to that? For me, it's never an option that a player would have to be like restricted on a game day. And so what are we doing 2 weeks prior to that? Like, what are we doing that made them on that day? Unless there's, like I said, an acute injury or something that's popped up that's a reason for them shutting down. But to shut down completely because of load, it hurts us. Like that to me is not an option. So I really would challenge a practitioner, like go back. Why wasn't it considered, 28 days prior when you're looking at that chronic load? Like why was that not considered those things? And so for me, it's like that's not an option for a player to be shut down because of load management or because of a load restriction or those things, because it should have been handled on the practice side, on the shoot around side, on an off day or whatever it is. Like that should be taken care of then.
Yeah, you're exactly right, 100%. That there was many decisions that made or weren't made before a player getting shut down for quote unquote load management. So again, that's part of the stigma sometimes with the data, but at the same time, that's our job is to show them otherwise, which I think you do a great job, obviously, with the Lynx. So excited to see what that's going to look like moving forward. Another question I had, we kind of talked about maybe some of obviously the positives and the negatives and somewhere in between with regarding the data. What advice would you give to either a coach, whether it's an actual basketball coach, a performance coach, a practitioner, about they may be hesitant to trying to implement, some sort of performance data into what they're working on? What advice would you give them, and what, key things would you highlight for those individuals that might be a little hesitant of this type of data?
Yeah, I think anything that's new or different can feel challenging and overwhelming. So I can reflect back to like my first times using it, even like making sure that you're putting the puck in the right spot, or like you started the session, or you like I've been known to leave a session running for 24 hours, like this stuff. So I think sometimes it's like if it's not a part of your routine, and it's not there, it can feel really overwhelming and can be overstimulating for some of it. And so it feels like this giant sandwich, you know? And so I think it's just being slow and taking these bite sizes of it. And so like, that's where I said, start with just figuring out, literally like telling the players, like, this is what the pucks look like, you know, this is how we're going to use them and when you're going to put them in. And I'm going to stand at the exact same spot on the court and hand it to you every day and collect it every day. And you just build these routines. And so now it just becomes like second nature. So that part gets easier. And then it's looking at it, and it's like finding your pockets of time where I'll spend and just go through it. Like I got an hour right now. I'm just going to look through every shoot around. I'm going to extract the data. I'm going to look at it, find these things, and you just like pick let's look at all jump metrics, you know, and just look, you know, I think you just find these small moments that I think you can find that are helpful. I also think if you just look at like, what do you as a coach feel is valuable? Because there is so much information, but what aligns with my philosophy as a coach? Like, what do I really care about? And then let that apply to it. So it's not its own separate thing. It actually complements, or should complement, what you're already doing. And if it's not, then I think you're going the wrong place, or you need to change maybe some of your coaching philosophies and styles. But I wanted to look a certain way because that's how I coach in the weight room and on the floor, like that, then the KINEXON supports that. The same way with the coaching staff, it has to support what we're already doing. And then I think you just look for the questions. You have to be super curious. Like you really want to find that 1% better mentality, where it's like, this is going to be just a little bit of an edge, even if it's just for one player, even if it's just for one opponent. I think it's worth it. But I think sometimes we resist it because it's new, or it's hard, or it feels overwhelming. But I would just really encourage to start small and figure out what's sustainable. And then just like over time, just be super patient with it and talk to people. Like I learned through other people. I learned through you. I learned through Tyler. Like I'll ask questions to other people in the league. I think that's where you grow in that mentorship, like being so curious and hungry to keep growing. Because I don't even know if I talk to you 5 years from now, my approach probably will be different or think differently, or we'll have a new technology that we're utilizing within KINEXON that's going to change and alter. So be able to pivot and change it, but also like standing strong with like what you believe as far as like coaching philosophy with that team and with that roster.
Yeah. And that, again, really appreciate the insight there, Andrea. That's awesome to hear about, what your approach is and kind of your overall, areas of success when it comes to our data. And again, that's part of it. And understanding, hey, we can start very small if I'm a new person to this data and still show as much value. I've got teams that, have the best and brightest, but sometimes the conversation doesn't get up to coach, where there's a performance coach that, hey, we're looking at one metric and we find that metric extremely valuable for our team. And we're maximizing the value of that metric across our organization. And again, there's not a one size fits all approach to this, but again, you're exactly right. Finding what works inside your framework of who I am as a coach and what my organization wants to be, and just running with it. And I think, like you said, there's so many things along the way that you pick up that, hey, we're going to add this in now because we have the capacity for it, because we feel comfortable with the direction we're going with the data. And I tell people all the time, everyone's like, well, Trey, how do I make changes to my practice? Or how do I make changes to the way we train? And I think the misconception is that people are trying to make wholesale changes to how they're practicing and how they're playing. As you know, Andrea, we're talking small 5-minute, 10-minute incremental changes of, hey, we're gonna decrease this particular player's shoot around drill for 5 minutes. And it's, we do that for over the course of a month. That adds up. It's just like I tell people too, it's any approach to strength and conditioning. It's that small progressive overload over time. It's going to compound to something a heck of a lot greater. But again, that's the fun part for me. And you and I have had a lot of great conversations about, what that looks like, what that, for whether it's, hey, I'm trying to communicate this to my organization, or I'm just trying to get the most out of this as a user and as a practitioner. So those conversations are fun. And again, excited to see how the season goes for you specifically, obviously heading into your second full season using KINEXON LPS. Very excited. And, again, Andrea, really appreciate your time. I'm gonna, we're gonna call this end of this podcast episode. Again, I'd hope to have you as a return guest. I'd love to do it again. I'm sure KINEXON and the rest of our, our clients would love to hear more about it from you as well. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it, and best of luck this season.
Great. Thank you for the conversation. Thanks, Trey.
Talk to you soon.